MTC is proud to operate the Willacy County Regional Detention Facility in Raymondville, Texas. The U.S. Marshal Service has contracted with MTC to operate this facility, and we follow their requirements for security, staffing, recreation, food services, visitation, and every other aspect of operation.
I'm Marcy Martinez, and we continue breaking news coverage of a massive at the Willacy County Correctional Center today.
The philosophy of MTC is to not only provide safe, humane, and caring custody, but also offer effective rehabilitation opportunities with best practices and programming. At this facility, programs include SAMHSA Anger Management, Inside Out Dad, INEA, and many others. MTC believes in what we call a bionic philosophy. Bionic stands for Believe It or Not, I Can. Recreation opportunities are provided, as well as time to pursue other interests. Throughout a given week, a wide variety of faith-based activities are also offered. Daily medical care is provided, which is monitored closely by state officials and adheres to their strict guidelines.
Tensions were extremely high across the world due to one simple movie that was set to release in December of 2014. The Interview is a movie starring Seth Rogen and James Franco, as they are offered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to interview the leader of North Korea at the time. The CIA interjects themselves. They advise the two protagonists that their new mission is to assassinate a communist world leader. As the movie's release date drew closer, a North Korean hacker group known as the Guardians of Peace hacked Sony Pictures of America and leaked confidential data, sensitive emails, and personal information. The nation-state hacking group was determined to make an example of this movie, that they even threatened to attack the United States, with a note saying this: "Remember the 11th of September 2001. Sony Pictures caved and pulled all but a handful of theater releases, in fear of retaliation from the communist state. President Barack Obama came out and disagreed with Sony's response to pulling the movie, saying they should have came to him first, and that they should not have been intimidated by these threats. Sony Pictures of America let other nation-states know that they can now control our media." I say all of this because at this time in 2014, I was a correctional officer in a county jail in far west Texas. I was about 2 years into my law enforcement career and was splitting my time between a correctional officer and 911 dispatch. We were short-staffed at the time, and I had to swing both ways. That did not come out how I wanted it. As I got older, I transitioned from law enforcement to the private sector. I never really understood the unique situation I was in until I started learning more about technology and bad actors from nation-states. Working in a small county jail near the U.S.-Mexican border wasn't unusual for us to get high-risk federal inmates within our facility. Most notably, prominent members within local gangs and Mexican cartels, like the West Texas Tangos and Los Zetas. But for the most part, our federal inmate population was made up of illegal immigrants crossing the United States-Mexican border and drug smugglers. This was the most I had seen on the federal side. That is, until the United States Marshal Service brought in a high-risk, high-priority inmate who was facing charges of espionage and had ties to the North Korean government, which, if you're not aware, the charge of espionage carries a very harsh prison sentence, even up to death, and is a threat to national security. Now, I told the story to my friends as we hang out and socialize, but they always seem to ask me the same questions. And how did this person even wind up in the state of Texas? And why is our local government housing federal inmates? I had an answer to one of those questions, and also some theories that make the most sense. You see, the United States federal government has their own prison system, known as the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which is reserved to those convicted of a federal crime. But when you're arrested by the feds and charged with a crime, you are still technically innocent until proven guilty, and need to be held somewhere to await trial or post bond. Now, most likely, you'll be taken to a federal holding facility, and it's more than likely going to be a private prison system or a county jail. You see, it's easier and more economically viable for the United States government to contract with local county jails and private prisons to house inmates awaiting trial, opposed to building and managing their own. But with the recent downfall of private prisons, All of these federal inmates within the private prison system have been transferred out to either the Bureau of Prisons or a different jail. That still doesn't mean the United States government doesn't like to contract out their inmates. All of this information is available on their website, and they're called intergovernmental agreements. These agreements are contracted with local governments for different rates based on the agreement, and they go very far back. I guarantee that if you live in the United States, there is a local jail near you that is housing inmates for the federal government. Not uncommon, and quite frankly, I think it's a lot better than a private prison. And that's not to take some sort of political stance, but private prisons have been notorious for poor living conditions, treatment, and lack of medical care. One notorious private prison our government contracted with was a company called the Geo Group. They signed a $493 million contract with the federal government for just one private prison known as the Reeves County Detention Facility, which is ironically located in West Texas. Now, the correctional officers working these prisons are paid an average salary of $30,000 a year, or about $11.50 an hour, according to the Wayback Machine on their Indeed page in 2015, while the executives being the highest paid at an average of $223,849, with the CEO being paid in the millions. With all this being said, I want to refocus on the North Korean inmate we were talking about earlier. On a Saturday evening, I was in charge of booking on the B shift. With it being a Saturday night, we can expect a local arrest or two, mainly for DWIs or domestic issues. However, the U.S. Marshals and DEA are known to bring in federal inmates at a moment's notice. At around 8 p.m., dispatch received a call from our jail administrator, saying the Marshals are bringing in a high-risk inmate, and he is not to go to the back with the rest of the federal inmates, which in this case is somewhat normal. When we get high-risk inmates, we have to verify who we have in the cells and to make sure we're not pairing up rival gang members or co-defendants. Now, when the U.S. Marshals bring us inmates, they would usually do so in large quantities and have a U.S. Marshal transport van. They'd usually be wearing their casual Marshal polo and khakis. But this time, they rolled up in an unmarked SUV, they stepped out, and were in plain clothes. Upon stepping out, myself and another CO were standing by in the sally port, and that's when things got a little strange. You see, the Marshals tell us they're transporting an inmate who is charged with espionage, and that he appears to have ties to North Korea. He is very intelligent, very proficient as a locksmith, and is very well trained in CQB fighting, and that we cannot let him out of our sight. Alarm bells are going off in our head, but we do have our orders. So they bring him out, and he's an Asian man probably in his mid-30s. And not to sound stereotypical, but he was a lot taller than most Asian men. He had to be at least 6 foot tall and was very much in shape. And at this point during intake, we usually ask very basic questions like your name, date of birth, stuff like that. But this man didn't speak any English. So the Marshals hand us his booking sheet, and it has all the information we need to book somebody in. The only thing that was missing was his address information. The Marshals unloaded his personal property, and it wasn't much, just some paper and a prison writing pen. We then brought him to our jail's pat-down area, which is sort of a partition between the outside world and the jail. And from here, we can search someone and make sure no weapons or contraband actually make their way into the secure portion of the jail. Search goes fine, and we dress him out into our jumpers and put him in our holding cell. The Marshals get ready to leave and let us know that they will be back Monday morning. We've got our orders to keep him up front and be very cautious around this inmate. But we never had an issue with him. The 30 hours or so we had with this inmate went just fine. He would spend his time writing letters. Anytime we had to serve him food, he was very nice. He would give us a thank you gesture and smile at us every time. He was very well mannered, but I think most of us had this weird anxiety around him, simply due to the situation that we had a man arrested for espionage with North Korean ties sitting in the same building as us 20-year-olds. As Monday morning rolled around, I was working dispatch at this time. The Marshals gave us a call at around 7 a.m. and told us they would be en route for pickup. I let my booking officer know, and our jail administrator. The Marshals pulled into our sally port in the same unmarked unit and came in. They asked how he was, if we had any issues. Told him no, he was totally fine. The Marshals weren't surprised though. I think this man was way too smart to try and do something that would cause him even more trouble. The Marshals thanked us, we dressed him out in plain clothes, helped shackle the inmate, and they were on their way. This was the last time I ever saw or heard of this man, but it wasn't over in my head. It wasn't until years later that I was able to comprehend the situation. I had a realization that a moment like this will never happen to me again. And it just raised even more questions. Researching this individual, I cannot find a single shred of evidence of a man arrested for espionage in 2014 matching his description. I don't know why this would be, as most arrests for espionage seem to be very popular in the media. However, here are my theories on the matter of why he was here, what happened, and where he is now. Regarding why this inmate was at our jail in the first place didn't make any sense to me. That is, until I started watching a popular YouTuber who was an expert with our federal prison system, Larry Lawton, break down a Con Air and how quick the U.S. Marshals move inmates across the country actually makes sense. You see, the U.S. Marshals would transport prisoners across the country in various ways and at a moment's notice. But the Marshals have very strict guidelines when it comes to transporting prisoners, convicted or not. For instance, if an inmate has to use the restroom, they aren't just going to pull over to the nearest 7-Eleven for a quick break. They have to be taken to a secure facility like a prison, federal courthouse with a secure room, or a county jail. And given that the Marshals brought this inmate in the evening right before dark, makes me theorize that they were probably driving all day with this inmate and didn't want to have a high-risk inmate on the highway in the middle of nowhere, Texas. If they got into a wreck and lost custody of that inmate, it would be a PR nightmare. Which makes the most sense, considering he was only with us for a very short time. On where he is now, I have 3 theories that might be plausible, but I'll list them from least likely to most likely, in my opinion. My first theory was that he's dead, in the sense that the feds took him to some black site to never be heard of again. Which this is my least likely theory, simply because if there was even a slight potential of this happening, he never would have made his way into our jail, or any other small county jails following. They would have made arrangements behind the scenes to get him from point A to point B as secretly as possible. My second theory is that his charges were reduced, dropped, and he was released from custody. However, if your original charge is espionage, the US government is going to try to make an example out of you, or, and this is my final theory, they flipped him. And this makes the most sense to me. Because when you think about it, when you're facing 30 years to life in a Florence Supermax prison in Colorado, because you're a threat to national security from a foreign nation, you're facing some serious prison time. And you're probably strongly thinking of accepting this offer, because once he gets out, his country will not accept him back. So it would probably benefit him a lot more to flip on his country and live his life in protective custody, helping the US. If you've made it up to this point, I know what you're thinking. This story is bullshit, and that's okay. As I grew older, I realized the most bizarre and strange stories don't come from movies, books, or video games. They come from us. As we go about this little thing called life, the stories we've had along the way sometimes make no sense. So I give you this. I want you to think of a time or experience in your life that makes no sense. Share it with somebody you love, post it below, or talk with your friends. For as long as we live, the stories we tell are what helps shape us into who we are. And I want to clarify that this is my own personal story and one that I'd like to share. However, if there are any federal agencies watching this story was all a joke. There is no need to come after me. Hold on. That's strange timing. Hello?